The rhythmic scraping of a shovel against frozen earth was the only sound in the graveyard of Oakhaven, a town that existed mostly on maps and rarely in the memories of those who passed it by. Silas Vance, a man whose face was a map of scars and regrets, wiped the sweat from his brow despite the biting November wind. He wasn't a gravedigger by profession, but tonight, he was digging for the only thing that could clear his name, a coffin that shouldn't be empty. 10 years ago, Silas had been the town's golden boy, a star athlete with a bright future. That future had ended the night his fiancée, Clara, went missing. They found her car at the edge of the Devil's Throat, a limestone gorge that swallowed secrets. There was no body, only a blood-stained scarf and a suicide note that didn't look like her handwriting. The town blamed Silas. The lack of a body meant no murder charge, but in the court of public opinion, he was a dead man walking. He had left Oakhaven in disgrace, only to return when an anonymous letter arrived at his doorstep in the city. It contained a single Polaroid of Clara's grave, with a message scrawled on the back. "She's not resting. She's waiting." As the shovel hit wood with a hollow thud, Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He cleared the dirt away, revealing the lid of the casket. With a crowbar, he pried it open. The wood groaned, a long, high-pitched scream of metal on timber. When the lid finally gave way, Silas stumbled back, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. The coffin was empty of a body, but it wasn't empty. Inside lay a telephone, a vintage rotary phone, its cord snaking down into the bottom of the casket as if it were rooted in the earth itself. Suddenly, the phone began to ring. The sound was jarring, a mechanical trill that echoed off the headstones. Silas stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He shouldn't pick it up. Every instinct told him to run, to leave Oakhaven and never look back. But the ringing was insistent, a physical weight in the air. He reached down, his fingers trembling, and lifted the receiver. "Silas?" The voice was a whisper, distorted by static, but he knew it. It was Clara. "Silas, you have to find the lighthouse. The light isn't for the ships. It's for the things in the fog." The line went dead. Silas dropped the receiver, and as it hit the silk lining of the coffin, the ground beneath him began to vibrate. He scrambled out of the grave just as the earth began to settle back in, as if the hole were a wound healing itself. He didn't stop to grab his tools. He ran for his truck, the sound of that mechanical ring still vibrating in his teeth. Oakhaven's lighthouse had been decommissioned in the 1950s. It sat on a jagged tooth of rock called Widow's Peak, overlooking the Atlantic. The town grew up around the timber industry, and the lighthouse was forgotten, a relic of a time when the sea was the only way in or out. As Silas drove, the fog began to roll in. Not a natural fog, but a thick yellow miasma that smelled of sulfur and old salt. It clung to his windshield like grease. He arrived at the base of the peak. The lighthouse loomed above him, a white ghost in the yellow haze. The door was rusted shut, but a heavy kick sent it swinging inward. The air inside was stagnant, tasting of ozone. Silas began to climb the spiral stairs. Each step felt like a mile. His flashlight beam flickered, the batteries dying despite being brand new. At the top, in the lantern room, he found not a light bulb, but a machine. It was a complex web of brass gears, glass tubes filled with a glowing green liquid, and wires that seemed to be made of copper and human hair. In the center of the room sat a man. He was ancient, his skin like translucent parchment, his eyes stitched shut with silver thread. "You're late, Silas," the man said. He didn't move his lips. The voice came from the machine itself. "Clara told me you'd come. She's been very helpful." "Where is she?" Silas demanded, his hand moving to the pocket knife he carried. She is the fuel, the old man replied. This town isn't just a town. It's an anchor. We keep the things beneath the waves from noticing the world above. But the anchor is rusting. It needs fresh blood, fresh grief. Your grief has been simmering for 10 years. Silas. It's reached a perfect boil. The machine began to hum, a low-frequency vibration that made Silas's vision blur. He saw flashes of the night Clara disappeared. He saw her being led not to the gorge, but here. He saw the silver thread. He saw the way the lighthouse beam didn't shine outward, but downward, into the dark water. The Sterlings in Blackwood, the disappearances in the gorge. It's all connected, the man whispered. The world is thin in Oakhaven. We are the gatekeepers, and you, Silas, are the new key. Suddenly, the floor beneath Silas opened. He didn't fall into a room below. He fell into the fog itself. He felt himself being stretched, his memories being pulled from his brain like silk threads. He saw Clara. She was floating in the yellow haze, her eyes also stitched with silver. She reached out to him, her fingers cold as ice. Don't fight it, Silas, she whispered. The dark is quiet. The dark is safe. But Silas remembered the phone in the grave. He remembered the note. He realized the machine didn't just need his grief. It needed his consent. It needed him to give up. He looked at the machine in the center of the room, the brass gears turning with a relentless, clicking sound. He reached out and grabbed a loose wire, the one made of hair and copper. I'm not a key, Silas roared. I'm the ghost that haunts this place. He pulled. The wire snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The green liquid in the tubes turned a violent red and began to boil. The old man screamed. A sound that wasn't human. A sound of tearing metal and crashing waves. The lighthouse began to shake, the glass panes of the lantern room shattering outward. Silas felt the world snap back into focus. He was standing on the floor of the lantern room, the machine sparking and dying. The old man was gone, leaving behind only a pile of salt and silver thread. Clara was there, standing by the railing. She looked older, her face pale, but her eyes were open. Silas? She breathed. He moved toward her, but as his hand touched hers, she began to fade. The anchor is broken, she said, her voice a fading echo. The town. It's going to be noticed now. Run, Silas. Run before the sea remembers. The lighthouse groaned, the foundation cracking. Silas didn't hesitate. He practically fell down the stairs, bursting out into the night air. Behind him, the lighthouse didn't just collapse. It was pulled. Huge, dark tendrils rose from the water, wrapping around the stone tower and dragging it into the depths without a splash. Silas reached his truck and drove. He didn't look back until he reached the town limits. Behind him, Oakhaven was gone. There were no houses, no streets, only a vast, empty forest and the sound of the ocean hitting the cliffs. The town had been part of the fold, a temporary reality maintained by the machine. He pulled over at a diner miles away, his body shaking. He walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. When he looked in the mirror, he expected to see the scars, the trauma. But his face was smooth. The scars from the night Clara vanished were gone. He reached into his pocket and found a small, heavy object. He pulled it out. It was a silver thimble, and inside it was a single strand of silver thread. The mystery of Oakhaven was solved, but the silence of the forest outside the diner felt different now. It didn't feel empty. It felt like something was watching, something that had finally noticed the world above the waves. Silas sat at the counter and ordered a coffee. He picked up his phone to call the police to tell someone, anyone, what had happened. But when he opened his contacts, every name was gone. There was only one number saved in his phone, a number with no area code. He pressed call. Silas? The voice on the other end said, "It was the old man from the lighthouse. The anchor is broken, but the sea is very, very hungry. See you in the fog." Silas dropped the phone. Outside, the yellow fog began to creep across the parking lot, swallowing the cars, the trees, and the light of the diner. He realized then that he hadn't escaped. He had just moved to a different room in the house, and the door was already locked. The diner lights flickered. The waitress walked over, her eyes milky and clouded. "More coffee, Silas?" she asked, her voice a mechanical trill. He looked at the silver thread in his hand and realized it was already beginning to wind itself around his fingers, stitching him into the fabric of a new nightmare. The mystery wasn't how Clara died. It was how many more like him were needed to keep the world from falling into the throat of the sea. And tonight, the quota had just been reset. The shadows in the corner of the diner began to pool, gaining shape and hunger. Silas closed his eyes, but it didn't help. He could still see the gears turning. He could still hear the ringing of the phone in the grave. And as the yellow fog pressed against the windows, Silas Thorne finally understood. Some secrets aren't meant to be dug up. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, because once they have your attention, they never, ever let go. He sat there, the steam from the coffee rising like miniature ghosts. The waitress didn't move. She stood with the pot tilted, the dark liquid pouring over the rim of the cup, splashing onto the counter, then onto Silas's lap. He didn't feel the heat. He didn't feel anything. The world was becoming a series of still frames, a slideshow of terror. He looked out the window again. The fog was no longer just a mist. It was a wall of faces, the faces of everyone who had ever gone missing in Oakhaven. They were pressed against the glass, their mouths moving in silent pleas. He saw Clara among them, her expression one of eternal apology. "I'm sorry, Silas," her silent lips formed. "The sea doesn't forget a debt." The diner walls began to peel away, revealing the same damp stone of the lighthouse stairs. The jukebox began to play a record, but the music was the sound of grinding gears and the rhythmic heartbeat of something massive and ancient. Silas tried to stand, but his feet were rooted to the floorboards. He looked down and saw that the wood was turning into the same hair and copper wire he had snapped in the lighthouse. It was weaving itself through his boots, up his legs, binding him to the stool. The other patrons in the diner, a trucker, a young couple, an old man reading a paper, all turned to look at him simultaneously. Their eyes were all stitched shut with silver thread. They began to chant, a low, guttural sound that vibrated in Silas's bones. "The anchor is cast. The blood is paid. The sea is full." Silas felt the silver thread from his pocket tighten around his neck. It wasn't a thread anymore. It was a tether. He was being pulled. Not back to the graveyard, not to the lighthouse, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere the light of the sun had never touched. He saw the old man again, appearing in the booth across from him. The man reached out with a hand that was now made of pure salt. "You fought well, Silas. But the machine was only a symptom. The house, the fold, the anchor, they are all parts of the same body. And you are just another cell." The diner floor gave way completely, and Silas fell into a void of yellow fog and salt water. He felt the pressure of the depths crushing his chest, the sound of 1,000 rotary phones ringing in his ears. He realized that the letter, the grave, the phone, it was all a ritual. He had performed every step perfectly. He had dug the hole, he had answered the call, he had climbed the peak, and he had destroyed the barrier. He hadn't broken the anchor. He had become the new one. As he sank, he saw the light from the diner above him fading into a tiny, distant star. He saw the shadow of a massive creature moving in the depths below, its eyes like twin moons. He felt the silver thread finally complete its work, stitching his eyes shut, sealing his lips, and binding his soul to the cold, dark Atlantic. He was no longer Silas Vance. He was the secret that Oakhaven would use to protect itself for another 100 years. And as the last bubble of air left his lungs, he heard the voice of the house, the same voice that had spoken to Elias Thorne in Blackwood Pines. "Welcome to the collection, Silas. We've been waiting for a hero like you." The darkness was absolute, but in that darkness, Silas could see everything. He saw the letters being written. He saw the cream-colored envelopes. And he saw his own hand, made of salt and shadow, reaching out to lick the stamp for the next invitation. The cycle was relentless. In a city miles away, another young man with a heavy heart and a curiosity for the unknown was walking to his mailbox. He would find a cream-colored envelope. He would see a gold-rimmed card. And he would feel a sudden, inexplicable urge to visit a small town called Oakhaven. Silas watched him from the depths, a silent observer in the fold. He wanted to warn him. He wanted to scream. But his lips were stitched, and his voice was now only the sound of the wind through the trees and the waves against the cliff. He was part of the architecture of fear now, a pillar in the temple of the abyss. The world above would go on, oblivious to the price being paid beneath their feet. They would drive past the empty forests, never knowing that a whole town had once stood there. They would look at the sea and see only water, never knowing that it was filled with the eyes of the forgotten. The fog in the diner parking lot finally cleared, leaving behind nothing but an empty lot and a rusted sign that swung in the wind. The diner was gone. The people were gone. The only thing left was a single Polaroid lying on the asphalt, face down. If someone were to pick it up, they would see a picture of a man sitting at a diner counter, his face smooth, his eyes stitched with silver, and a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. On the back, in neat gold-lettered script, it would say, "He's not resting. He's working." And as the sun finally rose over the Atlantic, the sea was calm, its hunger satisfied for another day. But deep below, the gears were already beginning to turn for the next meal. The mystery wasn't in the disappearance. It was in the reappearance. Because in the world of the fold, nothing ever truly goes away. It just waits for its turn to be remembered. The silver thread continued to pulse with a faint, rhythmic glow, synchronized with the deep-sea heartbeat of the creature below. Silas felt his consciousness fragmenting, becoming one with the salt, the silt, and the cold currents. He could feel every fish that swam through him, every grain of sand that shifted on his skin. He was the ocean now, and the ocean was him. He remembered Clara's face one last time, not as the ghost in the fog, but as the girl he had loved. He realized that she wasn't his fuel. He was hers. They were two halves of the same broken anchor, holding back a tide that was inevitable. The thought brought a strange, cold comfort. In the end, they were together, even if they were only shadows in a yellow mist. The rotary phone rang one last time, a distant sound that echoed through the entire Atlantic basin. Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. He was the dial tone. He was the static. He was the silence that follows a scream. And in that silence, Oakhaven finally found its peace, buried under a mile of water and a century of lies. The world turned, the sun shone, and the secret remained, a jagged tooth in the dark, waiting for the next brave soul to come and dig. The shadows around the diner site lengthened as the day progressed, but they didn't follow the sun. They moved independently, creeping toward the road, toward the unsuspecting travelers who would soon pass by. The house was expanding. The fold was growing. And Silas Vance, the golden boy of Oakhaven, was the light that guided the way, not for the ships, but for the things that lived in the hunger of the sea. the story was far from over. It was just waiting for a new narrator, a new witness, and a new set of eyes to be stitched shut. Because in this universe, the only thing more terrifying than being forgotten is being remembered by the wrong things. Silas knew this now, as he drifted in the eternal dark, a ghost among ghosts, a secret among secrets. He was the mystery and he was the answer, and he was very, very hungry. In the distance, the sound of a car engine could be heard. It was a faint, clicking sound, like an engine cooling in the July heat. A new journalist was coming. A new story was beginning. And the house was already setting the table. 6 plates, 6 sets of silver, and in the center a bowl of fruit that would never rot. The fold was ready. The anchor was set, and the sea was waiting. Silas closed his non-existent eyes and breathed in the salt. It was time to work. It was time to invite the world in one letter at a time. The cream-colored envelopes were already in the mail. The gold-rimmed cards were already written. And the truth, as always, was buried just deep enough to be found by someone looking for a big break. Silas smiled, and the ocean floor trembled with the sound of 1,000 voices whispering the same name. Oakhaven. Welcome home. We've been expecting you. The darkness swallowed the last of the light, and the world was finally, perfectly, terrifyingly still.